thank you for joining my talk at the OctoberPDFest 2020. Thanks to the association for hosting this event instead of the cancel PDF days. It's always unfortunate to cancel live events, and this is a very good alternative. Many thanks for that. So forget the PS5, I've got a PDF 2.0. As many along with me, I'm looking forward to the release of the PlayStation 5 later this year. But I couldn't wait. I needed a new gaming experience earlier, sooner, and I needed one now. I've always toyed with the idea of pushing PDF beyond what it is meant to do and what people expect of it. And this talk is all about that. So let's dive into the madness that is PDF game development 101. But first, let me take a minute or two to introduce myself. As you might have guessed while registering for this talk, my name is Michael. First and foremost, I'm a proud father of two young, mischievous children who I hope grow up to be gamers as well. My oldest seems to have gotten a taste for it, as she always asks to play Mario or Donkey Kong, which goes to show that propaganda does work when you get them young enough. As for my daytime activities, I'm a software engineer. I've been an iText developer since 2011. And as of 2018, I lead the research team. And one of the tasks of that team is trying to find ways to innovate and push the company and the product into new ways on a technological level. As a result, I write a lot of POCs, proof of concept prototypes, that may or may not end up as a product. This leads to me dreaming about other things as well, things that we can do with PDF, with iText. And internally, we've always had this running joke about doing extremely silly things to PDF. So it was only normal to me when the CFP for OctoberPDFest came about. I figured to submit this idea and see how far we can push it. Turns out PDF can do a lot more than you would expect. You can find me on Twitter under this handle. I don't tweet often, but I do reply to tweets aimed at me or DMs. It's also my handle on other platforms should you want to connect to me as to, I don't know, maybe play some games with me. This is totally not an attempt to find online gaming buddies, not at all. So moving on, we'll take a step or two back before we dive into how game development works. Let's take a look at what game development is and why it is conflicting a bit with PDF. The answer is simple. It's developing a game. But what exactly is a game? Games, at least to me, they are one of the art forms similar to literature, music, movies, etc. But gaming is different. It's distinct in the sense that, by definition, games are interactive pieces of media. Games involve the consumer by having the consumer make choices beyond what to view or what to listen to, which museum to visit. A game relies on regular interaction or input from the user. And these inputs, they trigger actions within the game, changing the state, which allows the user to make new and hopefully interesting choices. And it's this kind of feedback loop that makes games interesting. And game design, game development is all about making that loop work, making that as interesting as possible, creating a whole experience. So the big question that's up in the air is, why hasn't anyone done this before? Why hasn't anyone made a game in PDF yet? The answer is simple, yet it is complex the more you look into why. The simple answer is that nobody could be bothered. The longer and more elaborate answer has a bit more depth, but some of which you could probably figure out yourself. But the biggest reason is that no one has done this before. It is a kind of a chicken or egg kind of deal. Nobody is doing it because nobody has done it, but that's why nobody's doing it in the first place. There is nobody to hold your hand to do this, and you're going beyond PDF. The main issue that you come across is that compared to a lot of other game development platforms, and yeah, I'm calling PDF a game development platform from now on, that when you compare PDF to those, that there are a lot of missing features. In other platforms, there's always a system in place that deals with the game loop that we mentioned earlier, the feedback loop between user, the game, and the rendering. PDF doesn't really have this. It's as if it's not meant to do that. But I've seen people play games on toasters, and last week I even saw somebody play a game that was powered by potatoes. Next to that, there is a scripting language inside PDF. There is a JavaScript implementation available, but it is limited, very limited. It's as if the writers of the spec didn't think anyone would use PDFs for more than files or documents. There is also no way of doing memory, at least no obvious way of doing memory. There is no networking API available, so all the tools that game development platforms offer aren't available. So the more we go into this, the more it's obvious that PDF is going to work against you. So on top of that, there is close to no tooling available. Debugging PDF files, debugging JavaScript in PDF is hard. The tools are there and they serve very well for the use cases that they're intended for. But as soon as you want to do more complex stuff, like developing a game, for instance, you're on your own, and you're back to using print messages as debugging statements like caveman. There is no rendering framework. You can't use JavaScript to render graphics to a screen or to manipulate vectors that are already drawn onto the screen. And lastly, there is no documentation because nobody has gone here before. There's nobody reading tutorials because nobody has written tutorials yet. But of course, the main reason, the obvious reason, is that the D in PDF stands for document. It doesn't stand for gaming, it's not PGF. Although that portable gaming format does sound nice, to be honest. But developing games feels like the whole format is against this whole idea. And I've never felt more like a salmon swimming upstream in my life as I did when implementing these games. So why? I mean, why would you do it? Every fiber of the PDF specification is against you. You're fighting an uphill battle way before you even open up your editor of choice. It's fun. It's fun, and it's fun to talk about. It's fun to think about, theorize. As soon as I mentioned this topic, the CFP, to other PDF experts in my office, their faces lit up immediately, and they were brainstorming along with me how to circumvent certain limitations, how to handle with roadblocks, and think about constructions, how to avoid certain pitfalls. It is fun because it's a whole different problem. It's engineering driven to the extreme. PDF engineering driven to the extreme. But the question as to why boils down to one reason, basically. We are human, we are people. And people do things because they want to see if they can. It doesn't matter if it's useless or if it's the most useful thing in the world. Take this man, for instance. He's climbing up a column that doesn't really go anywhere. Is it useful? Does it get him to higher ground, or does he need to go over to get to the other side? No, he doesn't. There's nothing up there. And don't get me wrong, I got into rock climbing myself just before the pandemic hit, and I'd love to climb this column as well. But he can clearly go around it, and there's nothing for him at the top, at least that I can see. Maybe somebody threw his keys up there. I don't know. He does this simply because he can, and because he wants to know he can do it. It just turns out that the more useless things are, the most fun they are. And on one hand, we've got people shooting rockets to Mars and having the boosters land autonomously, and that is really cool. And then on the other hand, we've got people trying to get Doom to run on a toaster, and I'm equally intrigued. So the first idea is to take it nice and easy. This is a game that everybody knows. I would hope that everybody knows this game. It's a Sudoku. It's an easy thing to implement. The rules are simple. There aren't a lot of edge cases. It's not leaning too heavily into the JavaScript, not leaning too heavily into breaking PDF files. Perfect for a first example. So what it boils down to is validation of forms, basically. The user steers the game doesn't change if the user doesn't do anything. It's easy, simple. That's what we want to start with. So creating this grid is easy. You just create 81 squares, text fields, and you're off. The difficulty lies in how to evaluate the entered values. And there are two approaches. Either you hard code the value into the JavaScript, or you do a generic validation. Hard coding means that the field has a JavaScript attached to it that checks the data that is entered against the data that is stored within the JavaScript. Going back one slide, you see here that we've got a 6 here, a 6 here, and in the 4th and 6th row as well, meaning that a 6 needs to be in this cell right here. So this cell would have attached a JavaScript that checks any entered value against the 6. That works, that's easy. You also get very quickly to an implementation that works, which is fun. What isn't fun is that as soon as you want to try another Sudoku puzzle, you have to fill out 81, but less than 81, but you have to fill out 81 cells with the same JavaScript but change the numbers. That is not maintainable. The other way to do it is to validate against the row, against the column, and against the subgrid, whether or not that value is present already in one of those 3 vectors. And that is what I did, which allows me to customize the Sudoku at will. If I want to make it more difficult, if I want to try a different one, it's all possible. And this is that JavaScript. So there is a check line, a check column, and a check subgrid. And they all return false if the value is already present. So this is a perfectly valid JavaScript that can be used within PDF. And that means that we've got a working game. But we want to make it look pretty as well. I say pretty, but I'm not a designer. I'm a programmer, so this is the best you'll get out of me. Some purple, I think, and some gray squares with numbers inside. So this is where I usually have a quick demo, but my workstation died just before the presentation. There is a link at the end of the presentation to a GitHub where I will upload the PDF files for you to try out after the session. It's very unfortunate, but moving on. This is a question that you might have. Wasn't that a bit too easy? Where's the game loop? Can I not just print this file and fill it out whenever I want to? Do I really need to be on a PC to fill out Sudokus? I've got books at home to fill out Sudokus. And yeah, that was a bit too easy. But starting out slow and easy to make sure that we can do this. Baby steps are important. You don't want to go jumping into the deep end before you know you can swim. You want to jump into the shallow end head first. Either way, it hurts. But the concept here is that we used a lot of PDF constructs. We didn't venture too far away from the specification. It's form validation through JavaScript. Basically what this game is. So to move deeper into the jungle, we need a bigger machete, and we need to tackle more complex game concepts, which is where this one comes into play. This is Sokoban. Some of you might recognize that. It's an old school puzzle game where you push blocks on top of, in this case, circles, gold tiles. As soon as all the blocks have been moved into the correct position, the level is over and you progress to the next level. So that's an easy game as well to implement if you have a normal gaming development platform available. So again, nice and easy step by step. So right off the bat, we already see a few obstacles presented to us by the PDF spec. The major one being moving images, moving items. I'm sure that a lot of you haven't seen a PDF file that has moving objects about. That there is no way, at least that I found, to move images or to manipulate rendering instructions through JavaScript. Another one is that the player is moving this character on his own. He's inputting up, left, right, down, and the game follows the instructions. How do you do input? That's another big question. How do you change levels, etc.? There's a lot of open questions here to which no answer is immediately or obviously available. So I had to find a way around these issues. How do we move objects? How do we manipulate something? Now, if you think about what can be manipulated through JavaScript, there's a few things, but one of the features that pops out the most are form fields. Form fields are an interesting piece of technology for this, for multiple reasons. The main one is that they have a bounding box, a rectangle, two coordinate pairs, x and y, and an x and y for the opposing coordinate. But JavaScript can manipulate that bounding box. That rectangle can be manipulated through events. In addition to that, there's also different types of form fields. You've got buttons, you've got radio buttons, text fields, etc., etc. These also have bounding boxes, but I'm more interested in the type. You can assign different roles to different kinds of fields. So this is the JavaScript to move a button in a PDF file. It's pretty short. So you get the field that was assigned the name player. In this case, that's a button. Then you get the rectangle, which is the bounding box. You increment the x values of the both coordinate pairs, and then you assign the rectangle again to the player. And that moves about the player rectangle. That's all there is to it. Of course, you would have some validation depending on whether you pressed left or right, because now it's moving to the right with 20 user points. But you also want to move left, I suppose, and up and down. But in essence, this is how you get to move buttons in PDF file, which is, to be honest, the first time I saw that was pretty amazing. But how do you get the thing to move? Sokoban works with its inputs. WASD, you move up, down, left, right. How do you capture the keystrokes of the user? There is no clear way of capturing inputs. PDF doesn't poll the keyboard, or you cannot poll the keyboard from JavaScript. So how do you do it? The answer was a bit counterintuitive and feels hacky, like most of the things that I tried. I have a hidden text field somewhere. Either it's ridiculously small or it's somewhere obscured. Doesn't really matter where. It's invisible to the user. As soon as the document opens, as a page opens, there is JavaScript that is being triggered that gives focus to that form field. And then every time you press WASD to move, the JavaScript analyzes the character that you input, the key that you pressed, and the appropriate JavaScript function is triggered, moving up or down. How to request focus in JavaScript? Pretty easy. Again, you get a field. This time it's a text field that I called controls, and you set focus to it. And to make it a true gaming experience, I also set the full screen value to true. Don't want to be distracted while playing this game, of course. Immersion is everything. So tying up loose ends, we've moved past the PDF specific issues, basically, the basics. There's more, which we'll touch upon, but the easy stuff remains to finish the game. These are all questions and scenarios that have been answered by game development developers before. Like collision detection is a solved problem. Fixed recondition check, do you have all the blocks been put in the right position? Level progression is something that we haven't talked about yet. How would you move from the first level to the second level, for instance? And I figured there's basically two ways about it. There's the hard way. You would use JavaScript to completely reorganize the fields, the level, to make up a second level, but it's a lot of work and a lot of things can go wrong. But I figured, why not use the PDF specification for once? Why not work with it instead of against it? And every level in the game is a page. As soon as you finish level 1, you move to level 2, which is on the second page. And as soon as I made that click, it was obvious that that is a very elegant way to do it. It also comes with the added bonus that you can also print this game and then move about the pieces yourself. Very similar to the Sudoku one. There's a trend going on here. This is an example of Programmer's Art. This is the first level that I implemented. Once again, I'll upload the PDF files to the GitHub link at the end of the presentation as soon as I can. But you would move your square box against this radio button and move it all the way up to the pink or red field, and then that would end the level. That is how you would play it. Do try it out when you've got the chance. Bookmark that link, and as soon as I can, I will push my files. The road ahead. I do want to keep working on this in my spare time. There's a lot of ideas that I do want to work on. There's some issues like sound is an issue. You can only have one channel of sound, etc. There's a lot of things that we need to work on. But what I do want to do is I want to work toward getting Doom to work in a PDF file. Doom is being used as a benchmark for any kind of system that has been released, be it hardware or anything that has a chip. Basically, somebody is out there trying to run Doom on it. So there's a few options there. One of the main issues is sound. I mentioned it just now. You only have one channel, and trying to get 2 different sounds, 3 different sounds to play is a bit of a nightmare. So watch this space. This might be coming up in the near future. So how do you create these PDF files? I'm going to show you a few techniques on how to implement these in your workflow. Well, I say workflow, but how to use iText at least to get to these results. So I've been an iText employee since 2011. But I've been using iText for a longer time. It's a very mature open source library written in Java and C#, and it's developed in 2000s. I wasn't even in high school back then. And it's refined. It's been refined for over 20 years now. We just had our anniversary earlier this year, before the pandemic hit, so that was fun. But iText is a robust, versatile, and performant library. It is dual licensed, meaning that there is an option to purchase a commercial license in case users or companies mostly don't want to adhere to the license terms of the AGPL, which is a variation of the GPL, which is viral license, as you might know. We have users all over the world, open source and commercials, and most of the profiles of our users and customers are software developers, technology vendors, integrators. But it's basically all about developers, developers, developers. iText, the company has 2 main product lines, I would say. They have a core, the enterprise grade library, as it's written on the slide deck, but it's the core library. This is the iText that everybody knows for over 20 years now. It's how you create PDF files, how you manipulate them, how you sign them. You would do HTML to PDF conversion. Everything is done on a JVM or the CLR in the case of the .NET environment. An additional shout out to Alexei Subach, who had a presentation 2 days ago about typographic features. Go check it out when available. And on the right-hand side, we have iText Ditto, which is a low-code technology solution. Ditto consists out of 2 parts. There is a template-based designer in which you have a what you see is what you get editor, and you design templates by drag and drop. You drop tables, you drop images onto a editor, and it figures out. You can drag them as you want. On the second part is an SDK that runs in the backend. You connect to your data, which can be external through APIs or can be on your in your databases, and then you would feed that into the SDK. You select which template you want to use, and out comes a PDF file. This is a very short, very brief explanation of how Ditto works. There's a link at the end of the slide deck to which you can request an online demo or a demo session even. So how and why did I use iText to create in the game? The API of iText is very powerful. It's very flexible. There's a lot of convenience in it. There's a high-level API in which you can just add high-level objects like paragraphs, tables, form fields to a document, and iText just does what it needs to do. You don't need to know any PDF syntax. But then again, you can also go very low. You can go nitty-gritty, and you can fine-tune on the syntax level and customize PDF just as you want it, which is what I've done. So I created most PDFs with a high-level API, and then I fine-tuned them on the low level. I inserted the JavaScript. I manipulated the JavaScript using the low-level operations. So what is an action? A JavaScript function that can be triggered by event. What you need to know is that these can be placed on a lot of levels: document level, page level, or a form field level. So with iText, what I've done is I've created JavaScript actions, and the API is pretty clear on this, pretty obvious on this. So PDF action dot create JavaScript, and then you pass it to JavaScript as a string or as a reference. Here it's the same string that we talked about earlier. And you have your action available, ready to attach it to any kind of object that PDF specification allows. So here we are attaching that JavaScript to a field. First of all, we create a text field. We pass it a bounding box. We give it a name, and we give it an initial value. And then we set the JavaScript that we just created to that controls. We have to add a trigger. The K trigger is a key up or key down. I'm not really remembering it correctly, but it's a keystroke event. That's what I used it for. And then you attach that field to the form, which will add it to the document. All in all, this is just 4 lines of code. If you add the boilerplate code, like opening a document, opening IO, and flushing to Discord memory, all in all, you'll end up with about 10 to 15 lines. In 10 to 15 lines, you have a PDF file with which you can move about a button with your keyboard, which is incredibly strong, I feel. But I can hear a lot of people already think JavaScript is a security issue. It's a risk, and you are right. And by default, most viewers will have disabled JavaScript, and you will need to enable it. So what you might want to do to protect your workflow is to remove JavaScript from a PDF file. Here is a simple use case in which you get an macro field, a field with JavaScript. And then you remove it by setting the JavaScript reference to a null. This effectively removes all JavaScript from your PDF file, or at least from this form field. But you can do this over a range of fields, of course. I wanted to also talk a bit more about more convenient solutions. This is a snippet of PDF HTML, which is an HTML to PDF converter solution that we bring. It's a one-liner, basically. You have one line of code, HTML converter convert to PDF. You give it a HTML source, PDF destination, and it's good to go. Out comes a PDF file. Do check out this link at the bottom. There is an online demo. You can try it out in the browser. And you can also read up, and you can try all of the tutorials concerning PDF HTML. Lastly, I also want to give you the URL to the online demo of Ditto. Up top, you see the template designer, which is what you see is what you get editor. So you drag from the right hand onto the middle part, and then you rearrange them and you style them as you want. You can request a demo on that link, and you can also request a demo session with one of my good colleagues, the Ditto product manager. And that about ends my presentation. Many thanks to everyone. Many thanks to the PDF Association for hosting this event. Do bookmark that URL. We will upload the PDF files as soon as we can for you to test out. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. Okay, well, it's time for some questions, and the question pod is available to you. And let's see here, questions do I have? You mentioned sound, Michael. What's the story with managing sound in the PDF context?
Yeah, so sound is a bit of a difficult issue. So there are provisions, that there are functionalities available in JavaScript to play sound. You can start a sound and you can stop a sound. But unfortunately, that's about it. You cannot play a background music, or you cannot simultaneously to a sound effect, for instance. At least I wasn't able to get that working. So you have to find a way to get them running simultaneously. So I opted not to have any sound effects or any sound, because that would cause a lot of issues. But I did do, this is a bit of a hack. So JavaScript inside PDF also has functionality available to play I think it's the operating system error sound or notification sound. So I went into my Windows settings. I changed the notification sound or the error sound to a gaming sound effect, to a Mario coin being collected, and you can play that. And in that sense, I did get two sounds to play at the same time, because I delegated the sound to my operating system.
Okay. So what? Okay, you mentioned, or you did mention it, but I'm curious as to why you didn't go with XFA instead of Acroforms-based technology.
Well, the title of this slide deck and of this presentation, first and all, is I've got a PDF 2.0. XFA is deprecated in PDF 2.0, so I didn't want to lean onto that again. And that's the main reason, basically.
Mm-hmm. Next questions. Do you have any early ideas on rendering a 3D shape for Doom?
No. When I was writing that slide, I figured I'm already sweating a lot just thinking about it. But I know it can be done, but I just don't know yet how. I am going to make this open source eventually. So if the person who asked the question is interested in collaboration, my GitHub handle is the same as my Twitter handle, I think. So feel free to follow me on GitHub. I have no idea yet on how to do that, but we'll get there eventually.